Today is the first from our series on strikes. I do plan later on to connect these strikes up into various combinations, but because I am doing the basics, I'll just be showing the individual strikes for the moment. A lot of the strikes I will be showing you early on come straight from Bruce Lee's style. The big advantage with Bruce Lee's style is it's simple, direct, and although it doesn't look fancy and pretty like in a kung fu film, it is extremely effective. And even today, most martial arts schools haven't caught up with some of the vital skills that Bruce Lee perfected. Some of the other strikes that I'll be doing later on are not very straightforward and will take quite a lot of explaining and a lot of practice. These are strikes that you wouldn't be using in normal circumstances until you've had a lot of chance to practice them, and until you've probably progressed a lot further as a martial artist, and not quite basics. So I'll leave those till a bit later on. And as usual, if there are any questions or comments, please write them on my site, and I'll be happy to try and answer them. Or if it's too complicated to answer with a quick statement, I might even make a video just on that if it's an interesting point. As I said, some of the more complicated moves that I'll be showing you later on may not be straightforward as much as I try to make them. So today is the lead jab. Now, why do we call it the lead jab? Bruce Lee had the theory that the problem with orthodox fighting methods is they always have their strongest weapons to the rear. He referred to your strikes, your punches and your kicks as your weapons. And it didn't make sense to have your best weapons at the rear, because in a combat situation you may not get the chance to use them, and so he always put his best foot forward, so to speak. So that means if you're right-handed, if you're stronger with your right hand, stronger with your right foot, you should have that as the leading point when you're in your defensive stance, which we discussed briefly in the stance section. The reason being is the orthodox theory is that you have as much room to wind up your strike as possible, whereas from the Bruce Lee's theory, and many of the Chinese kung fu styles share this point of view, that you put your strongest weapon first and balance up the weakness of your other weapon, i.e. your left hand if you're a right-hander, so that has more distance to travel, more chance to develop power, so it tends to equal things out. Now, of course, the orthodox styles argue that to strike from the lead is not powerful enough, and you want to put your maximum strike power in, and that's why they prefer to keep their weapons to the rear. But again, the argument comes back that your right side does have enough power, and if you develop your strikes properly, you will find that with a lead jab, which hasn't got a reputation as being a particularly strong strike, a lead jab is strong enough, powerful enough to knock a man down. And it's also faster. Now, with the theory of having the strongest blow forward, if you have your coordination right, you can deliver quite a strong blow with the lead, and you can balance up the weakness of your weaker side, which I'm talking from a right hand point of view would be your left hand. You can balance that weakness out, and when you have already opened your opponent up with a blow from the right side, you can then use the left side. Now, why this is important is the jab is often used as a ranging punch, just to know the distance between you and your opponent. And when you look at top professional fighters in sport, you'll often see that some of the best fighters will mainly only throw jabs, and that's coming from the left side, and they have no power. They're used primarily as a ranging tool, and I've often found that if you're watching boxing on television or something like that, it's often very boring from a sport point of view, because all you're seeing is jabs being thrown. The end of the match ends up being a points decision. There's nothing spectacular at all has occurred. That's because they've just been using ranging shots the whole time, and they don't have the power to do anything. So you will find that with strikes, depending on the ability of the two people opposed to each other, if they are both very good, there will be mainly jabs thrown. So if you can throw a good jab, that's going to be a great advantage. Now, apart from ranging, a jab provides you a safe method to advance or retreat. So you can find your range to where it meets your opponent, but you can also move into that range, throwing a jab as you do it, which will then help lead to other combinations. Basically, it's from the point of view that the best defense is offense. When you're retreating, you can also use a jab to retreat, so you're just not retreating, and it also disguises the fact that you are retreating to a certain extent. I think I spoke earlier about when you're using footwork to retreat, the risk of doing that is that you allow your opponent a bit of room that he can use to follow you and attack while you're retreating, and if the timing's perfect, he can get that as you stop, and you completely connect with it. So good for safe advances and retreats. Good for setting up other strikes in combination. It's also a good and easy answer for a riposte. Now, what is a riposte? Well, in fighting technology, a riposte is an attack which comes straight off the attack of an opponent. It's originally a fencing term. A riposte is extensively used in fencing, where when someone lunges at you, or in the case of a slashing type attack, they will just bounce straight off the opponent's blade to form an attack back. Well, the same principle can be used in unarmed fighting. So if someone does throw a jab at you or a strike at you, you can block with your hand and immediately jab. So it forms a good riposte. It's a very quick and easy answer. Gives you a little bit of time to think, what are you going to do next? Because until you get your combinations flowing in you naturally, very often you need that little bit of time to think. And when one talks, you often say between words while you're letting your brain catch up with your mouth, so to speak. Well, you can't afford to do that in fighting. You have to have an immediate answer, or someone will clock you. Another thing about the jab, it is good for setting up a feint. Now, what is a feint? A feint is when you pretend to be preparing to attack your opponent, so that your opponent actually moves to counter that attack. Now, that's a more advanced technique we're getting into later on, but one thing is that you can do a feint and then jab. So you pretend to attack, they react, and then you attack. Now, how do you perform a jab? Now, we need to have power in our jab, and we need to make up for the fact that it doesn't have much room to travel relative to a blow from the rear. So you need to get your whole body in the shot, and that's why a jab can be effective, is because most people are just flicking their hands out, using it to range, or just flicking it out to prepare another strike. Now if you are able to do that, but add your body into it as well, the jab is extremely fast and it's powerful enough to do quite a bit of damage. Now how do you do that? The jab starts from a point where it might surprise you, but the jab starts from your toe on your rear foot. So you've got to push with your toe and lift your heel, and at the same time that energy from your heel is travelling up your leg. Now when you're in your stance, your knees are slightly bent. You can then extend your legs so that your knees straighten up, and that adds a little bit more momentum to your strike. And then you twist your hips at the same time in coordination, and that throws a rotation force in there which adds the momentum of your body behind it. And then your shoulder is following that, so that your back's twisting. You have a motion like that, a rocking motion, which you'll perhaps see more clearly when we go out into the field. And then following that, the arm extension comes out. Now you might notice I'm throwing a punch, but I'm not closing my fist. The reason for that is a relaxed hand is much faster than a tense hand, because when your hand is relaxed, the antagonistic muscles are also relaxed, and that is the reason why you need to be stretched and flexible, is so that your antagonistic muscles aren't acting like the brakes on a car. If you were driving down the street with your handbrake on, you notice a lack of power in your car. It's the same thing with those antagonistic muscles. So you need to have as much relaxation and floppiness in your hand as possible, so you get that whip effect. But then as that comes right out, right at the point of impact, then you tense your hand. So I'll try and get that in the field of view a little bit better. Right at the extension, that's when your hand tenses. And you've got everything. You've got the muscles from your calves, you've got the muscles from your hips, very large sheets of muscle in your back, your triceps here, and finally your wrist. All that together will provide quite a hard strike. You need to do a bit of shadow boxing to try and get the handle of this jab, throwing it out quickly. And also, if you can do some mirror training, that is also very valuable. Mirror training, you get in front of the mirror, you get in your stance, you look in the mirror and see that your stance is correct and you're as covered as possible, and you've got your guard up as shown in the previous lesson on the guard. Now you need to use your nose as a sight. Just think of that little sight on the end of a gun barrel, for instance. That nose should always be sighting your direction. If that's the case, your eyes are on the target, and you can also protect yourself as it comes out. So although I'm sitting here and I'm not quite in my stance, you can probably get the idea that as it's coming out, it's very hard to hit you, because your hand is basically covering everything, and the hand is the immediate problem. They need to defend against the hand, and it is difficult for them to punch around it, and if they do try to, you will find that you can either bring up like that, Wing Chun style, or change the strike into a block quite easily. Watch your extension and your withdrawal when you're doing this mirror practice. So try and make sure that you're covered all the time. Think about, are you open to be hit? Stay covered and watch your extension and your withdrawal. Do all that. Look, it does take a long while to get the coordination of this, but with the mirror training, practice it slowly and then try to increase the speed, and then the mirror training starts to merge into the shadow boxing, where you get more speed into it, trying to get your whole body coordinated with these shots, and also to keep yourself covered with the shots and build up your speed, constantly working on building up your speed. And now we'll go out in the field and see how it looks in practice. Okay, the first thing to remember is get into your stance first. Now I'll give you a longer shot so you can see the feet once I've demonstrated the hands. Now first the hands are held up as usual. We're using that small phasic knee bent stance with the right lead. Now what you need to do is it starts with a push off from the rear foot, and you're twisting your hips, and you're twisting the upper body, and you're extending out, and right at the extension then you close the fist and tense. So you can practice it with just like a rocking movement until you get that rhythm and that pattern, and then try and increase your speed. Now with that last shot I was over exaggerating what happens with the rear foot just to get the point across, but you start with a push off the rear foot, so you should be standing up on your toe on that rear left foot. As you're doing it, you're swiveling on your front foot and you're throwing your hips out forwards, and you're bringing your shoulder round with it. So all these motions are occurring simultaneously, which means you've got all your body behind your jab, and you're extending your hand out to release all that energy to one point. And at the very end point is when you tense your hands so that you get that snap. And in that way it's very painful, and it has a lot of follow through as well. Some people have a lot of snap when they punch. It stings, but it doesn't really do a lot of damage. Some people have a lot of body and push behind their punch, and again it pushes, but it hasn't got enough velocity. Force is mass times velocity, so the more velocity you can get into it, the more it'll stab, and the more momentum you get behind it, the more that force will follow through.